Hello YouTube. Welcome back. This is Balor again, and I have some bad news. The character you're seeing in the background here, Spark, we made a few changes. First, we completely re-rolled it into an assassin. We did see in the last video that I was trying to do some shrine self-curse shenanigans. So eventually, with the gear we got, which I will go through, we ended up with a total of about 250% duration. So you pick up a 1 minute shrine in a map, it lasts 2.5 minutes instead of 1 minute. So the idea should have been great. The idea should have been great. The first mistake I made was making it on an Inquisitor. Inquisitor drops Consecrated Ground all the time, and Consecrated Ground has a built-in 50% reduced effective curses on you, which is the opposite of what we want. So I swapped out of that, made it as an assassin instead with basically the same tree, and then was like, okay, this works better. And then I was like, this still doesn't feel right. And what we found out is that the shrine buff from the staff doesn't actually do what it says on the tin. So let's jump into the path building. I'll show people what went wrong, but this build was a failure. All right, here we are in the path of building. This is it currently set up. This is the version that I had. We're at 400,000 per hit, which is more than enough for something like Spark, where you're hitting very, very often and covering the full screen. Absolutely fine. I will say right off the bat, if I just took this exact build and all I did was take off all of the temp chains stuff, the self-curse temp chains, replace it with a real curse, get real rings instead of increased curse effect rings, replace the Solstice Vigil with a real amulet, this number would be around about 1 million per hit instead of 400,000 per hit. And slap on a headhunter and go sparking, and it would go fantastic. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. It would have been great, but that's not what I was trying to do. What I was trying to do was scale, gain a random shrine buff every 10 seconds. That's what I wanted. I was under the impression that this would be a random shrine buff every 10 seconds. So the plan was to use all of the shrine nodes on the Atlas, a gull, a blunderbore, self-curse temp chains, increase effect of the curses on me, Solstice Vigil for even more duration, get those shrines up to about 2.5 minutes each, which will be more than enough to finish the entire map. And I'll have something along the lines of, what was that, 14, 15 shrines on me just from the staff. That was the plan. That was going to be quite a good mapper. Absolutely disgusting. In order to get around self-curse temp chaining myself, we had a great plan. We had a balance of terror here. Action speed cannot be modified below base value if you've cast temporal chains in the last 10 seconds. That time also seemed to get extended, so I only had to do that every 20 something seconds, which was absolutely fine. Nothing wrong with any of that. Where did the build fall apart? Well, it doesn't do what it says on the tin. The bad news is gain a random shrine buff every 10 seconds actually gives you gain random shrine _2 buff every 10 seconds. What does that mean, Balor? Well, it's exactly the same as the normal shrine buffs, except they only last 10 seconds, which means my 2.5 times duration scaling was only giving me 2.5 shrines. I would have 2 shrines up, and then like a third one would pop up for about 5 seconds and it would fall off. And the entire build premise was built around stacking 15 shrine buffs all on me, and it was going to have a slow ramp up, but by the end of every single map it was just going to be zooming, and I was going to have a lot of fun with it, and it's great. And the enchant cost you about 80 divines, so I have made the sacrifice and lost all the money. There's no way I'm going to recoup the money that it cost us to craft these rings, because the build doesn't function. But there is some good news. If you want to play Spark, my god, does this work as a template to play Spark. This can be done as either Inquisitor or Assassin. The only difference is We take the assassin stuff right here, or we come in, take this life, grab that, and link there. The rest of the tree would stay the same. So I want to point out a few things that matter if you are interested in playing Spark. One, staffs are pretty OP for staff, but you could also go dual wanding. If you went dual wanding, you wouldn't use this. But the important bits is projectile speed, projectile damage, cast speed, projectile speed, PS, projectile damage. We want projectile speed, and we want a lot of it. So we've got streamlines over here for even more projectile speed, more projectile speed, more projectile speed. Honestly, I probably should have had one more streamlined aerodynamic instead of streamlined repeater. One more of those would have been good. Those will help you get enough projectile speed, and long shot, that would have worked fine. Long shot is definitely the anoint for this. Again, more projectile speed, more damage, everything's great. This little setup right here is the first time I've encountered it. I'm sure it's used in many other builds, but this is absolutely disgusting. I'm definitely going to be using this again. So this is an unnatural instinct. These aren't too expensive. And what they do is allocate all small passives in the radius. Allocated passives gives nothing, but it allocates everything else. Basically, these nodes aren't working. These projectile damage nodes aren't working. This strength node does nothing because I've taken them. Everything else in the radius gets taken. That's fine. We've used these before. But combine that in the Scion area with the Light of Meaning, and whatever we put in here has so many goddamn nodes taken that it's borderline OP. I'm probably going to use this in some other setting somewhere, but I don't even want to count them. There's too many. Passives in radius also grant 6% lightning damage. That means every single passive that I've taken is also 6% lightning damage. But then down here where they overlap, well, it's as if I've taken all these nodes as well. So every single one of them also gains 6% lightning damage, and then Unnatural Instinct allocates them all. And this one jewel ends up being about 26% of our total damage, which is just an insane amount. So I'm definitely going to use that again. But that is everything there is to say about this. I'm real sad about the staff being quite bad. There is an alternative, but to be honest, I got sad with the build and decided to move on. So you can see I've made a Slayer Lightning Strike, but don't worry about that. There was one other staff buff that could be very interesting. Over here, 25% chance when you kill a magic monster to gain its modifier for 60 seconds. Well, that's the Replica Headhunter. The good thing about that is you can only have one buff when you're using a Headhunter of each kind. Well, the magic modifiers that are the same on rare monsters and magic monsters aren't actually the same modifier. So you can steal the same modifier twice if you're using a staff, and steal one from a magic and one from a rare, and they'll stack. So that's cool. I thought about using that, but to be honest, it was going to cost way too much money, and I was just real sad about the shrines. So that's all. Unfortunately, this was a very expensive experiment, and it failed, and I'm not going to be able to recoup the costs out of that. That is why I have moved on to making a Slayer, just a Lightning Strike Slayer. We're going to do some tier 17, some different map strategies, do all that sort of stuff. I'm going to come back and try some more interesting builds when I have regained some money again. That is all. I will see everybody next time. Goodbye.